Good morning. So we're here with Lee Mallon on the first version of the podcast. Hi, Lee. How you doing?
I'm good. Thank you very much.
Would you like to do a little bit of an intro about yourself? I mean, we've known each other for a while. We've connected on LinkedIn several years ago, actually, but it's only recently when we started having weekly conversations, let's say. And these conversations is what led me into this podcast thing, basically. So yeah, do you want to do a little bit of intro about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Lee Mallon. I have been coding on and off for the last 25 years. I ran my own kind of mobile app agency in the UK for the last 10 years. And I'm currently traveling around the world with my family for what was meant to be 1 year, but is now 2 years, and maybe I can convince them to do 3. And along that way, I've been playing around with some of my own projects and writing a book as well.
Wow, that sounds really great. Actually, this could be the whole point of another podcast just for that. Several years out of UK. Very interesting.
Yeah, there's definitely. I have a whole book just ranting about the inabilities of hotels using technology. Right.
Where could we find this book if we're interested?
It's at the moment I was writing a book around and I'm sure we'll get into this topic a little bit, around the concept of how software and code is basically runs our entire lives now. And I was going to basically write the whole thing and then release it, but editing is just taking a bit too long. So I've started to release kind of like a mini chapter every week, which if you go to codeiscurrency.com, you can view them all on there. It's free. There's no paywall or anything. Or you can just sign up and you'll get an email every week. And then I'm just slowly doing it. And if, as you see them and read them, there's anything you think like is wrong, as you could improve, or a different perspective, feel free to email me. Like, I'm happy to kind of take that endpoint and tweak accordingly.
Absolutely. That's the agile way of writing a book, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Smaller bits.
Yeah. Everyone who tells you not to write a book and then you don't listen to them and you start writing a book and you realize like you should have listened to them in the first place, because it is a massively heavy undertaking, not just in the act of writing if you're not that familiar with it, but just to come up with a narrative, and it really makes you question like your perspective on something, which is great, but it's definitely like a year commitment if you're going to do something like this.
Yeah, agreed. Nice. So the point of this first episode is to talk about the future of tech. Now we have a few ideas and a few things that we want to talk about. So yeah, let's make a start on that.
Where to begin?
Well, let's see.
I think at the moment a good kind of anchor point would be that we're like, GitHub has just announced the general availability of Copilot, which is the AI pairing assistant, or whatever you want to call it, for developers. And I think it sets an interesting kind of point in development as to where a lot of code now people will write will not be theirs. Not to say it was theirs in the first place, it was typically from Stack Overflow, but I think now we're starting to see that kind of merge of all the systems that we've been building for other industries really start to affect our own. And I'm intrigued to see how like developers behave in that. Half the audience in the world was in uproar that, God forbid, a company like Microsoft would dare to charge developers for such a feature. And the other half were overjoyed that this thing was only going to cost $10 a month and how much more productive they would be. But have you used Copilot?
I haven't actually used it. I was going to ask you this, if you've actually used it yourself to do anything meaningful with it.
Yeah, I've been using it for a couple of months. And to be honest, I find it is more a very good IntelliSense. I haven't used it really for like creating like buckets of code, but it seems to have a much better understanding of the files I have open at the time. So if I define a variable and then I reference it further down, it just fixes like lazy mistakes that you'll then build or you'll do something. Oh, for God's sake! And I just find it's catching enough of them that it's just saving them like them 10 seconds here, 10 seconds there. I'm intrigued to see how that kind of develops like in the future, because Copilot I remember seeing Copilot like years ago because it was a GitHub Labs project called Semantic Search. And you could go to this like playground site on the GitHub website, and they had a kind of small repo of code. And the examples they would give you is find the code that draws a graph. And it would basically find the code in the project, which had all the characteristics of how you would draw a graph within code, which was very kind of interesting. But you can see how that's now with the OpenAI and GTP3, which I think Copilot's largely kind of based around, is now making that more kind of in the hands of developers rather than just something at the periphery around searching and finding. Whereas now, are we going to get to the point where you can turn this thing into to write most of your code? I think testing is probably where this thing's going to really shine, and be able to write tests with more of a natural language, like a more like BDD kind of language kind of tone, but then scaffold these things out for you in a way that we've never had before.
That's
my
very
hope
interesting
anyway.
point. Yeah, that's a very interesting point, actually. Now, testing, as far as I'm concerned, is probably one of the hardest things to do, right? And you can look around and see that it's not actually being done properly in the industry as a whole. Really, you've got a number of tools that you have to put together. So, for example, let's say you want to test the looks of a website or the functionality as a user would, right? You've touched on BDD and a text description of what that would look like. But then there's a question of tools. Which ones are you going to be using? Are you going to use something like Selenium? Are you going to use something like Cypress, maybe? If you use Selenium, then you have other dependency on web drivers, and you end up in this rabbit hole of you need one thing, which leads to another thing, which leads to another thing. Now, is a tool capable of doing that for us? And then you have versions and other things. So it's interesting to say that. I'm curious to see as well how this evolves.
Yeah, I'm not seeing anything that is quite prominent yet. I've seen some kind of like tipples of people working in this space, and I do think that we will get to a point where, like, if you look at some of the frameworks, like have you used Playwright?
Playwright? No, I don't know.
It's kind of it's an interesting like Node kind of JavaScript based kind of testing framework, like Selenium, but you could argue like more modern or more down with the kids. But it's quite nice. And I think we're just more and more abstraction away, but also like there's no reason why, like if you just abstract out machine learning as a training set and then like the real world and then your answers, like we have people manually test stuff all the time. So we can just record that, and there's a big enough sample of data out there that then you can model that, and then you would get your kind of like you'd be able to kind of map it out. But I do think that's going to move more into developers' hands. So you can say, when the website loads, tap the menu, go to the about page, scroll to the bottom. Like these terms are not massively complicated. There's just the black box in the middle of it understanding menu. Scroll's quite self-explanatory. About pages, again, self-explanatory. I think there's just a few little key things which then get very nuanced with design and UX. But personally, I think that's where, like, that's the next massive opportunity for someone or for some company, is if you can basically create AI-based testing tools.
Interesting.
Like it'll be quite a fascinating space.
I've seen concerns from some people, also excitement, but also concerns. What does this actually mean for a software developer? if anyone can put this together, and do we really think that someone who's a non-developer could actually just write some text and get that translated into a working product?
Well, I think I have a I think quite opposite opinion to most developers, in that I think like our time is done. It's been a great run, and there's about 28 million developers in the world, of which roughly 14 million of them are like full-time career developers. The rest are like part-time, or not paid because they're like helping out people, etc. And there's like over 5 billion people online. Like there's just not, there's millions of open tech jobs. Like it just has to be the case that more non-developers understand how this stuff works, and the tooling of which they use gets better and more intuitive, and developers create more APIs, integrations, natural language understanding, AI models. Like I do think the days of a developer building a CRUD app are kind of done, because I have a 10-year-old who I showed Airtable to, and in 10 minutes she created a whole structure for our second year travel, like countries we're going to, storing our flights, like referencing like all of our tickets we print out, an itinerary, and an iCal link that then we added to our phones, and she did this in a few hours, and she's 10. Wow. So it's I think that more and more the convergence of technology and non-developers, or non-IT, or however you want to frame it, is just going to keep going. And I think the work from home kind of movement, because of the pandemic and COVID and everything, like I do a lot of mentoring, and I particularly do a lot of mentoring for young, inexperienced developers in Africa, particularly Kenya and Nigeria, who are unbelievable, like technically unbelievable, but they're still subjective to geographic and racism around with Western companies, and people are trying to underpay them, even though their skills are equal, if not better, than their counterparts in the States or in Europe. But I think work from home, and you start to see some of the narratives come out of companies like Airbnb and Microsoft and Google, etc., around having people in the office or not having people in the office. And eventually, I do think that like it's not going to matter where you are. It's going to come down to trust, character, and skill. And the developers and the contractors who are in London demanding their high day rates are going to be screwed, because someone's going to do it somewhere else in the world and probably better. And the companies can not do that now because they're not set up for it. But because of the pandemic and COVID, they're changing the systems, they're changing how they work. And therefore, like that pool of developers is just going to open up exponentially. From these kind of emerging kind of tech hubs. And they're a lot more eager for it, because it opens up such a potential possibility for them and their families as they go forward. It's definitely, I think, the next 10 years is, I think, the final heyday for what we would term as like the traditional software developer. Because after that, like so children in the UK from the age of 5 now learn coding fundamentals, algorithm, like, and a lot of it is very drag and drop, but it's fundamentals of coding, not IT, not Office, like actual coding. So even if you start from now, in 13 years time, when then people hit the jobs market, they're all going to know how to do it. Like some of them might not have embraced it, but all the way through school, they will understand the fundamentals of technology. So eventually everyone's going to know how to code.
Interesting. So in that case, we see right now there's a whole movement around teaching more people how to code anyway, right? And get into tech.
Yeah.
You touched on the lack of people to fill all these jobs right now. So what does the future look like then for those people who are trying now to get into this and trying to break into the industry, which we know it's not very easy for a number of reasons? So 10 years is what I would describe as a normal career leading to a senior kind of role. So what would we tell these people then?
The main thing is, everyone has a privilege of some sort, knowledge, location, language, whatever it may be. And the people are not utilizing that opportunity. So for example, if you're in the middle of a farm anywhere in the world, but you have internet connection, you can contribute to open source, you can engage with communities, you can reach out to developers on teams. Like everyone says that senior developers are busy, but like if that was the case, we wouldn't have 10,000 blogs about how to control an IoT sensor for a cat flap. Experienced developers have time, like anyone who's experienced in their career. They just choose to spend it on certain things, and you just have to, make your way to think that you're one of them things they should do through potentially mentoring you or just, passing on knowledge. So I think that there's yes, it is hard to get into the industry. It's hard to get in any industry when you've got no experience, and it is a bit of a hustle game. There are ways that you can shortcut it, like contributing to open source, joining projects that are free, going to local charities who can't afford the work and basically saying, I'll build you something for free. Getting together with, if you're great at code, but you suck at UI, get together with a designer who's really good at that. And then you create something that turns out to be better for both of you because it functionally works and it looks good. Like this is all stuff that is kind of obvious, but 99% of the people I speak to don't do it. They come on a call and they say, I've emailed 100 companies and no one's responded to me.
Yeah. And that's normal, right? You should expect that kind of answer. It is if you don't put in the effort to actually make yourself stand out, I would argue.
Yeah, completely. And also, I think what I do think in the next kind of decade, things are going to change because you're going to have people who have learned computer science or whatever it will be defined at school, university, online courses, etc. And currently they're coming to the market and they're saying, I'm a React developer, I'm a Vue developer, I'm a Python developer.
Yes.
And actually, that shouldn't be how you define yourself, because that's just a skill set and implies that you can't change and you can't adapt. But that's what companies are looking for because they equally are not as well versed on what they need. They're just trying to solve, we write in Python, we need more Python developers. And still to this day, it is hard to get good developers, both technically and what is determined as soft skills to communicate with the business, to communicate with each other, to be able to work remotely or in an office. These things are definitely not to be shied away from, and are massively important. But I think what's going to happen is you're going to get people who have the domain knowledge who are going to learn the technical skills. So if you're then in an interview with someone and you have 3 years of React and 2 years of Figma, but the person you're sitting next to has 1.5 years of React and 2 months of Figma, but you're applying for a job at McLaren, and the person with the lesser experience has basically been building McLarens their entire life because that's their love, their passion, and they just happen to have learned the technical skills. Who do you think is getting hired?
Yep, I can see the answer being the person with the domain knowledge, obviously. On
you would hope, and I think at the moment that's not the case. I think people are just trying to get bums on seats, and they're trying to scale, and we're seeing the kind of the nuclear winter of the high growth tech sector, and not everyone, but mass layoffs because growth was overstretched for the current climate. But the companies that you see are doing, good hiring. They're hiring slow. They're hiring the right people. They're hiring for whatever you deem as cultural
Yeah.
fit. But that can mean a multitude of things. But particularly, I think just understanding the problem at heart. If it's farming, if it's food production, if it's cars, space, whatever the thing may be, like that's what you need them to have the technical skills. But if they have this other bit, they're going to have such a different perspective of the end customer or user that someone who's just been coding for 10 years can ever have.
Interesting, because if you look at our industry, most developers would not spend too much time in one place, or even in the same industry. Yep. Right? You change roles, but when you change roles, you don't necessarily look at the industry as a target. I'm arguing probably for most people, really. I mean, I know I don't. I would be looking at, is the work interesting? Is the package okay? That's the kind of stuff I would look for, rather than, okay, I've worked in the tourism industry. Maybe I want to stay in that one, where my domain knowledge would be useful, right? Is that, do you think, maybe because we think we can actually pick up, and we should reasonably expect to pick up domain language in anything given enough time?
Oh, completely. And and anyone can learn anything, like it is just a matter of time and resources and the laws of physics. But I do think that the person, like most technical developers are not going to a job to solve the problem. They're going to a job to use the technology.
Yes. Yeah. Correct. Yeah. I've seen that as well. Yeah.
And to them, that is the problem. If you said to someone, we can solve world hunger by making Microsoft Access databases, like you would think everyone would want to jump and do that role because it's going to solve world hunger.
Yeah.
But to be honest, I think most developers don't. They would be like, well, can we use these 6,000 different tools that all hook together into microservices, please? And that's not the problem. Whereas if you had someone who was massively passionate about world hunger and had worked at, refugee camps and had worked in supply chain management and then happened to learn to code, like it's a game changer on what that person can then bring to the table.
Wow, that is such a different point of view. So I'm actually very happy that we're having this conversation. I never thought about it like that. As a developer, if you work in tech, you do that because you're interested in technology, right? Because you want to learn, because you want to upskill. So of course you'd want to play with the latest shiny tools, whatever they may be, because that's part of the natural progression, let's say. But that doesn't even look at the actual result of our work, right? What are we actually accomplishing?
Yeah, I would question if you put 10 developers in a room and you asked them what thing they worked on that was most impactful, they would really find it difficult to answer that question. Or they would answer it based on the technology answer. We scaled to 10,000 machines. We did this, we did that. I think very few would say, oh, I built something that saved 20 people's lives.
Yeah,
which I find a bit sad, but I do think it's going to change, because it's just we're more and more becoming, our full existence is digital, however horrible that is, and work is as well, and therefore work from home made people get used to things like Teams and Slack and bots and laptops and having a home office. And, oh, I can do this. And I think that even just the fact of not having to do the 9 a.m. commute and being able to walk your kids to school or go to the gym or go out for lunch, like these are just little kind of like endorphin kickoffs in people's brains that have gone on for like a year to 2 years. And they will go, holy shit, I can change my work environment and have this nice life. What if I also can change how I do my work? Maybe that can step things up as well. And I've seen it kind of, firsthand, and I hope to see it more. But I do think that there will always be a place for developers, in building things. But coding will become like DIY. We'll all want to put a shelf up. Maybe some of us will build a shed. But if we're gonna basically knock a wall down and stick a conservatory on, we're probably going to call the builders. But I think it's going to move more into that territory where currently now we see non-developers as people who build websites with Squarespace or WordPress. And I think the next stage will be people will build websites with React or Vue, and we'll be seeing the same.
Without actually knowing React or Vue.
or they'll know enough.
Yeah.
To get the job done. And I think that, the same with the DIY bit, is kind of, we know enough to get that bit done and we're happy with it. But if we need that extra bit more, then that's where we make that decision to, to bring someone else in or to upskill.
Yeah. I mean, some of that is what's happening right now anyway, because let's face it, how many of us know a lot of things, right? To build a product these days, it's not just, oh, you learn a framework and that's it. Okay, you might be using a front-end framework, you might be using a back-end language, but that's not all there is to it. You need to speak to some third-party APIs, you need some sort of databases, you need other things, like maybe there's a search plugin that you need to use. So you have to have this kind of vision as well of putting things together and understanding how they work. And that's what makes things complicated, because it's not just one thing. You can't just say, I'm going to learn one thing and that's it. Like an accounting. Well, I learned to do accounting, I'm done, right? Not really. You've got a million of other little things that you have to be good at and understand. And that's where the problem lies. So that's where I'm thinking, how much can automation help us with it? Okay, I might be able to describe a problem, but then the implementation is still complex and we expect a tool to actually solve it for us. So that's kind of the angle that I want to see how we solve that angle if we can. And that should be interesting to see in the next 5 years.
Yeah, I think, do you want to, we got 2 minutes left on this bit because the timer, do you want to reconnect?
Yes, so I think maybe, I'm not sure what to say. Maybe this is enough for a first episode, or maybe we can patch them up after that. Yeah, let's do a reconnect. But thank you very much, Lee, so far for everything. That was a brilliant discussion.
Oh, cool. It's nice to chat about it. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, we've been doing this for a while now. This is what, our fourth conversation, I believe, on a weekly basis.
Yeah. It's cool. It's cool. I think, like you said, I think it just, I equally like to receive and also to give them moments where you just go, huh,
yeah,
I hadn't thought about it like that.
Yeah, I had that epiphany in this episode. Yes.
Yeah. No, and I think, but and I've had that many times reading your comments, and I think that that's what makes us mature, and that's what makes us kind of really adapt to what's going to come next.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you very much, Lee. Appreciate it. And this is the probably the end of the first episode. Thank you very much.
No problem.